Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Uh, what were we doing? What were we reading last? We were reading Dracula last week, obviously. But what were we doing? We had returned to London, and we were hearing. Oh, Dr. Van Helsing had just shown up, and Lucy just got whammied. She got her blood. She had been rapidly losing blood, despite no anemia or obvious internal bleeding or wounds or anything, other than the two very conspicuously placed wounds that look like they have been accessed many times on her neck. So Dr. Van Helsing showed up last week, and he was like, "What are you doing? Where's these garlic flowers?" And and of course, Lucy was like, "Yeah, sure, okay, whatever, as long as it stops making me faint all the time. I faint enough from all the arsenic paint and gaslights and uh, lead makeup and stuff. At least one of those things is anachronistic. Yell at me about it, please. Um, give me my interaction. Send me an email. Post in the comments on YouTube. Like, subscribe. Rate me 5 stars on iTunes. Have I shilled enough for my things yet? Anyway, now, once I pour myself some water, hopefully without spilling it all over the place. Alright, sips successfully acquired, so I'm not, dying midstream, like, I'm dying, I have no water. You know, turning into a little shriveled raisin. I want to be good food for the vampire. I want to have lots of blood. Um, oh man, I'm in some kind of form tonight. Let's let's get right into it. Let's head back in and find out how well or poorly these garlic blossoms go with Chapter 11, an excerpt from Lucy Westenra's diary. 12 September. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce. And yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I've had against sleep so often of late. The pain of the sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep, with such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am, tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play with virgin krantz and maiden struments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everyone. We once again have another excerpt from Dr. Seward. Uh, like I said, I would love to apply some kind of like uh, what is the like banded filter? Like a frequency band is what I'm looking for. I want to like find the frequency band that these wax cylinders applied to. And heck, I've got no shortage of record clicks, and record clicks are similar, not dissimilar to wax cylinder clicks. I've got a whole when I was ripping my music off of my records and my CDs, there's an entire like section of empty record on one or two of my discs, so I could just overlay that along with the filter band, and it would sound relatively accurate. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not like I actually uh am cutting it onto a wax cylinder, but I don't own a wax cylinder machine, and they're very expensive and very difficult to repair. So what I'm thinking of will have to do. Either way, I digress. Let's read Dr. Seward's diary here. 13 September. called at the Berkeley and found Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at Hillingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sunshine... cool. Or the page won't turn. The bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like the completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met with Mrs. Westenra coming out of the morning room. She's always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said, "You will be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep. I looked into her own room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her." The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said, "Ah, I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working." To which she answered, "You must not take all the credit to yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me." How do you mean, ma'am?" "Well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night, and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly, that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy." No way. Anyway, there was a lot of those horrible strong-smelling flowers. You're kidding me. Horrible strong-smelling flowers about everywhere. She actually had a bunch of them round her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away and opened a bit of the window to let in a little fresh air. You'll be pleased with her, I'm sure." You're kidding me. You are kidding me. This man was like, "Oh yes, the garlic flowers. They are pungent smelling. They will stop the problem." And then her mom is like, No. Those are too smelly." You've got to be kidding me. Anyway. She moved off into her boudoir, where she usually breakfasted early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face, and saw it turn ashen grey. He had been able to retain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room. But the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me suddenly and forcibly into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down on a chair, and, putting his hands before his face, began to sob with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. God! What have we done? What has this poor thing done, that we are all sore beset? Is there fate among us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that must things such be, and in such way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best, does she think... library. Oh, sorry. Oh, usually he misses when he steps there. Not this time. Is there fate among us still, set down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be, and in such a way? Is this mother, all unknowing, and all for the best, does she think, does such thing as lose her daughter, body and soul, and we must not tell her, we must not even warn her, or she die, and then we both die. Oh, how we are beset, how are all the powers of the devils against us." Suddenly he jumped to his feet. Come, we must see an act. Devils or no devils, or all the devils at once, it matters not. We fight him all the same." He went to the hall door for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew up the blind, whilst Van Helsing went toward the bed. This time he did not start as he looked on the poor face with the same... with the same awful waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity. "As I expected," he murmured with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word, he went and locked the door, then began to set out on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity, and began to take off my coat, but he stopped me with a warning hand. "No, today you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already." As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again the operation, again the narcotic, again some return of color to the ashy cheeks, and the regular breathing of healthy sleep. This time I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took an opportunity of telling Mrs. Westenra that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, that the breathing of their odour was part of the system of cure. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying he would watch this night and the next, and would send me word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly much not the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I'm beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. Return to Lucy Westenra's diary. 17th September. 4 days and nights of peace. I'm getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare, and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half-remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make the present distress more poignant. And then long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the window, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be, for a day in Amsterdam, but I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I do not fear to go to sleep again, although the bows or baths or something tapped almost angrily against the window panes. We find a clipping from the Pall Mall Gazette on the 18th of September. The escaped wolf. Perilous adventure of our interview with the keeper in the zoological gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the zoological gardens in which the wolf department is included. Thomas Bilder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be of the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called business until the supper was over and we were all satisfied. When the table was cleared, he had lit his pipe, and he said, "Now, sir, you can go on and ask me what you want. You'll excuse me refusing to talk of professional subjects afore meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas in all our section their tea before I begin to ask them questions." How do you mean, ask them questions?" I queried, wishful to get him into a talkative mood. Hitting him over the head with a pole is one way, scratching the hairs is another. When it gets his flush, it wants to show off to the gals. I don't so much mind the first hitting with a pole before I checks on their dinner, but I waits until they've had their sherry and coffee, so to speak, before I tries on with the ear scratching. Mind you," he added philosophically, "there's a deal of the same nature in us as them there animals. Here you a coming and asking of me questions about my business, and I that grumpy like only for your bloomin' earthquake, I'd just seen you blowed for you answered." I'm not gonna lie, I really hope you guys have a book open for this section. This does not sound intelligible the way I'm saying it. Let's continue. For I'd answer, "Not even when you ask me sarcastic like, if you'd like to ask the superintendent if you might ask me questions. What offense did I tell you to go to hell? Well, you did. And when you said you'd report me for using obscene language, that was hitting me over the head. But the earthquake made it right, and I wasn't going to fight, so I waited for the food and did what my old wolves and lions and the tigers does. But Lord love your heart, now that the old woman has stuck a chunk of her teeth cake in me and rinsed me out with her blooming old teapot, I've lit up. You can scratch my ears for all you're worth and won't even get a growl out of me. Drive me along with your questions. I know what you're coming at, that there escaped wolf. Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened, and when I know the facts, I'll get you to say what you consider the cause of it was, and how you think the whole affair will end. All right, Governor. This here's about the whole story. That air wolf was called Berserker. Was one of the three gray ones came from Norway to Jamrocks, which we bought him off 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf. He never gave no trouble to talk of. More surprised at him for wanting to get out of any more surprised for him wanting to get out than any other animal in the place. But there, you can't trust them wolves no more than you can women. Oh, don't you mind him, sir, broke in Mrs. Tom with a cheery laugh. He's got minding the animals so long, and blast if he isn't like an old wolf himself. There ain't no harm in him. Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday when I first heard any disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma which was ill, but when I heard the yelping and howling, I came away straight. There was Berserker and tearing like a mad thing at the bars if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people around that day. Close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap with a hook nose and a pointed beard with a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard, cold look and red eyes. I took a sort of mislike to him. Seemed like it was him they were irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and he pointed out the animals to me and says, "Keeper, these wolves seem upset at something." "It was you," says I, for I didn't like the airs he gave himself. He didn't get angry, as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile with a mouth full of white, sharp teeth. "Oh, no, they wouldn't like me," he says. "Oh, yes, they would," I says, imitating of him. They always likes a bone or two to clean their teeth on by tea time, which you's got a bag full. Well, it was an odd thing, but when the animals sees us talking, they lay down. When I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ears the same as ever. That there man came over, and blessed if he was, he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. "Take care," says I. "Berserker's quick." "Oh, never mind. I'm used to them." "Are you in the business yourself?" I says, taking off my hat for a man what trades in wolves, and said her is a good friend of keepers. "No, not exactly in the business, but I have made pets of several." And with that he lifts his head as polite as Lord, and he walks away. Old Berserker kept looking after him until he was out of sight, and went lay down in the corner and wouldn't come out the whole evening. Well, last night, as soon as the moon was up, the wolves all started howling. There ain't nothing for them to howl at. There was no one nearby except someone that was evidently calling a dog somewhere out back in the gardens of the park road. Once or twice I went to see all that was right, and when the howling stopped, just before 12 o'clock, I did take a look around before turning in, but bust me, when I came opposite the old Berserker's cage, I see the rails busted, twisted about, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain. Did anyone else see anything? One of our gardeners was coming home about that time from Harmony, and he sees a big gray dog coming out through the garden edges. At least so he says, but I don't give much for it myself. For if he did, he never said a word about his missus when he got one. And it was only after the escape of the wolf was made known, we'd been up all night hunting in the park for a Berserker. He remembered seeing anything. My own belief was that Harmony got into his head. Now, Mr. Builder, can you account in any way for the escape of the wolf? Well, sir, he said with a suspicious sort of modesty, I think I can, but I don't know how you'd be satisfied with the theory. Certainly I shall. If a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who is even to try? And, sir, I account for it this way. It seems like the wolf there escaped, simply because he wanted to get out. From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it had done service before, that the whole explanation was merely an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in bed. Uh, is that just say bad image in one word? Badinage? Sorry. I couldn't cope in badinage with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I knew a surer way to his heart, so I said, now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that the first half-sovereign worked off, and that brother of his is waiting to be claimed when you've told me what you think will happen. Right you are, sir. You'll excuse me, I know, for chafing off here, but the old woman here winked at me, which was as much as telling me to go on. Well, I never. My opinion is this here wolf is hiding off somewhere. Gardner, what didn't remember, said he was galloping northward faster than a horse could go, but I don't believe him. For you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more than dogs does. They not being built that way. Wolves just find things in storybook, and I just say when they gets in packs and does be chivying something, and be more feared than they make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life, a wolf's only a low creature, not half so clever and bold as a good dog, and not half quarter as so much of a fighter. This one hadn't been used to fighting, or even providing for himself. More like he's somewhere around the park, hiding and shivering, and when he thinks about it all, wondering where he's about to get his breakfast from. Or maybe he's got down some area getting a coal cellar. My eye won't some cook get a run start when he sees his green eyes shining out of the dark. If he can't get food, he's bound to look for it, and may happy find a chance to light up on a butcher's shop in time. If he doesn't, now some nursemaid goes walking off with a soldier, leaving the infant in the perambulator, well, then I shouldn't be surprised with since this is one baby the less, that's all. I was handing him the half-sovereign when something came bobbling up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length of surprise. God bless me. If that ain't their old berserker come by himself. He went to the door and opened it, a most unnecessary proceeding, it seemed to me. I've always thought that a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle of pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there's nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should of a dog. The animal itself was peaceful and well behaved as that father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence in masquerade. The whole scene was an unutterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf, that for half a day had paralyzed London and set all the children in the town shivering in their shoes, was there in a sort of penitent mood, and was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over with most tender solicitude, and when he had finished with his penitence, said, "There, I knew the poor old chap would get some kind of trouble. Didn't I say it all along? Here his head's been all cut full of broken glass. He's been getting over some bloomin' wall or other. Shame these people are allowed to top their walls with them broken bottles. It's here it comes of it. Come along, berserker." He took the wolf and locked him up in a cage, with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of the fatted calf, and went off to report. I came off, too, to report the only exclusive information that's given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary, 17th September. I was engaged after dinner in my study, posting up my books, which, through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy, had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient, with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck, for such a thing as a patient getting of his own accord into the superintendent's study is almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he'd struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. But before he could strike again, however, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in, and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up like a dog the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and, to my surprise, went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over, "The blood is the life! The blood is the life!" I cannot afford to lose blood just at any present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good, and the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and its horrible phases is telling on me. I'm overexcited. I'm overexcited and weary, and I need rest, rest, rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight I could not well do without it. A telegram from Van Helsing at Antwerp to Seward at Carfax. Sent to Carfax, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17 September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time, frequently visit and see that the flowers are as placed. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after arrival. Dr. Seward's diary. 18th September. Just off for train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost, and I know by bitter experience what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us, that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take this cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. Memorandum left by Lucy Westenra. 17 September night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by any chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness, and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual, taking care that the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after that sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby when Mina saved me, and which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing said he would be, so that I might have called him. I tried to go to sleep, but I could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come then when I did not want it, and so, as I feared to be alone, I opened my door and called out, "Is there anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, and so closed my door again. And then outside in the shrubbery I heard a howl, a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So I went back to bed again, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently the door opened, and Mother looked in, seeing by my moving that I was not asleep. She came in and sat by me. She said to me, even more sweetly and softly than her wont, "I was uneasy about you, darling. I came to see that you were all right." I feared she might catch cold sitting there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me, so she came into the bed, and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while, then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms, and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled, and a little frightened, and cried out, "What's that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and she stayed quiet, but I could hear her poor dear heart still beating terribly. After a while there was the low howl again, out in the shrubbery, and shortly after there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and the aperture of the broken panes there was and in the aperture of the broken panes there was the head of a great gaunt grey wolf. Mother cried out in fright, and struggled up into a sitting posture, and clutched wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clenched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing round my neck, and tore it away from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange, horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all around seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seemed to come blowing in through the broken window, and wheeling and circling round like a pillar of dust that travellers describe when there's a Simon in the desert. When there's a Simone in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me, and dear mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while. The time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near, a passing bell was tolling. Dogs all round the neighbourhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids, too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called them, and they came in. When they saw what had happened, and what it was that lay over me on the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed to. They lifted off the body of my dear mother and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I had gotten up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room and each have a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and then closed again. The maid shrieked, then went in a body to the dining room, and I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's chest. When they were there, I remembered what Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I didn't like to remove them, and besides, I would like to have some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called them, but got no answer, so I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank after I saw what had happened. They all four lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table, half full, and there was a strange, acrid smell about. I was suspicious, and examined the decanter. It smelt of laudanum, and looking on the sideboard, I found the bottle which mother's doctor uses for her, did use for her, rather, was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with mother. I cannot leave her, and I'm alone, save for the sleeping servants, whom someone has drugged. Alone with the dead, I dare not go out. I fear I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my chest, where they will find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother gone. It is time to go, too. Goodbye, dear Arthur, if I should not survive this night. God keep you, dear, and God help me. Hmm. One moment, I just thought of something that I can maybe do. Okay, we'll see what that does. I'm trying to address the microphone position. I took some test audios this weekend. Oh. Yeah, I've been trying to address my microphone a little better. Oh, brain loading. I've been trying to address my microphone a little better as of late, just because I realized I never sat down and figured out what is the best position for the microphone in here, and hopefully I'm approaching something a little more workable uh, now. Oh, should I stand up to continue reading? No, I'm gonna keep sitting. Hi, Magnus. You gonna come up here, kitty? He's like, no, I'm busy. Okay. Chapter 12, Dr. Seward's Diary. 18th September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped only to bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants, that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed to be drawing tight around us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy if she had again had one of those frightful relapses. And I went round the house to try if I could find, by chance, an entry anywhere. Distantly, we hear Dr. Seward smacking the wax cylinder machine from the strange failure of sound just emitted for a minute. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned, baffled, to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out, "Then it was you, and just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?" I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only gotten his telegram early in the morning, and had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make any one in the house hear me. He paused and raised his hat as he said solemnly, "Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done." With his usual recuperative energy he went on, "Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is all in all to us now." We went round to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case, and handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once, and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Then with a long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes, and opened the window. I helped the professor in, and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen, or in the servants' rooms, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away he said, "We can attend to them later." Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through the broken window, showing the drawn, white face with a look of terror fixed upon it. And by her side lay Lucy, with her face white and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck we found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing 2 little wounds, which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed, his head almost touching poor Lucy's chest. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listened. Leaping to his feet, he cried out, "It is not yet too late. Quick, quick, bring the brandy." I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums, and on her wrists and the palms of her hands, and he said to me, "I can do this, all that can be at the present. You go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard. Make them get heat and fire and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly, so I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, that if they delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy as well. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half-clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as she was, and placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that we must wait, that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience the professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as we all knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look that his face could wear. "If that were all, I would stop where we are now, let her fade into peace, for I see no light in life over her horizon." He went on with his work with, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Presently we began to both be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed, and as we lifted her from the bath into a hot sheet to dry, he said to me, "As the first gate is ours, check to the king." We took Lucy into another room, which had by now been papered, and laid her in bed, and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief around her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad as, if not worse than, we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women, and told her to stay with her, and not to take her eyes off her till we returned. Then we beckoned out into the room. Sorry, I need to stand. Getting a little snoozy. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining-room door, and we passed in, he closing the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down, with that obedience to the etiquette of death which the British woman of the lower classes always rigidly observes. The room was, therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant and spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You're exhausted already. I'm exhausted too. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have the courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who would open his veins for her?" Well, what's the matter with me, anyhow? The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of Quincy Morris. Hang on a second. Is Quincy? Am I using the right accent for Quincy Morris there? Let me check. The first thing that comes up on Google is Castlevania, not Dracula. It's kind of funny, actually. But then again, a good deal of these characters that we're mentioning here, they are likely to come up in Castlevania because, Dracula. Okay, yeah, Quincy Morris is the cowboy, so Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened and a glad look came into his eyes as I cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. "What brought you here?" "Well, I guess art is the cause." He handed me a telegram. "I have not heard from Seward for 3 days and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father in still the same condition. Send me word how Lucy is. Do not delay. Homewood." "Well, I think I came in only the nick of time. You just got to tell me what to do." Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking him straight in the eyes as he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble. You're a man, and make no mistake about it. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." Once again we went through that ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had got a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before, for though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subcutaneous injection of morphia, as before, and with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine and told the cook to get ready a good breakfast. I wish the camera was like 5% lower so you all could have just seen Library bullying me into petting him. Yeah, I'll sit down to read here in a minute. I just gotta stand up so I don't doze off. Too easily made sleepy. Then a thought struck me, and I went back to the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly and I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over as he sat with his hand to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who has had a doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I had read it, I stood looking at the professor, and after a pause asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she mad? Was she, or is she mad? What sort of horrible danger is this?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget for the present. You shall know and understand all in good time, but it will be later. And now, what is it that you came to me to say?" This brought me back to the fact that I was all myself again. "I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I am in hopes that we need have no inquest, for if we had, it would surely kill poor Lucy if nothing else did. I know, and you know, and the other doctor who attended her knows that Mrs. Westenra had a disease of the heart, and we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill up the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar and go on to the undertaker." "Good, oh my friend John. Well thought of. Truly, Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in the friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all opens her veins for her, besides one old man. Ah, yes, I know, friend John, I am not blind. I love you all the more for it. Now go." In the hall I met Quincy Morris with a telegram for Arthur telling him that Mrs. Westenra was dead, that Lucy had also been ill but now was getting on better, and that Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried me out, but as I was going said, "Now when you come back, Jack, may I have 2 words with you all to ourselves?" I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration, and arranged with the local undertaker to come up in the evening to measure for the coffin and to make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy, and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor had seemingly not moved from his seat at her side. From putting his finger to his lips, I gathered that he expected her to wake before long, and was afraid of forestalling nature. So I went down to Quincy and took him into the breakfast room, where the blinds were not drawn down, and which was a little more cheerful, or rather less cheerless than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me, "Jack Seward, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere I ain't got no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I love that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's all past and gone, I can't help but feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, fine old fellow he is, I can see that, said the time you 2 came into the room you must have another transfusion of blood. Both you and he were exhausted. Now I know well that you medical men speak in Chimera, and that a man must not expect to know what they consult about in private, but it is no common matter. Whatever it is, I done my part. Is that not so?" "That's so." And he went on, "I take it that both you and Van Helsing had both you and Van Helsing had done already what I did today. Is that not so?" "That's so." "And I guess Art was in on it too. When I saw him 4 days ago, down at his own place, he looked pretty strange. I haven't seen nothing pulled down so quick since I was on the Pampas and had a mare that was fond to go to grass all night. One of these big bats they call vampires got at her in the night, and what with his gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood in her to let her stand up. Had to put a bullet through her as she lay. Jack, if you tell me without betraying confidence, Arthur was first. Is that not so?" As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in a torture of suspense regarding the woman that he loved, and his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood of him, there was a royal lot of it too, to keep him from breaking down. I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished kept secret, but he already knew so much and guessed so much besides, that there would be no reason for not answering, so I answered in the same phrase. "That's so." "How long's this been going on?" 10 days. 10 days? And I guess, Jack Sward, the poor pretty creature we all of us had put into her veins within the time of that blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body wouldn't hold it." Then, coming close to me, he spoke in a fierce half-whisper. "What took it out?" I shook my head. That's the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it. I'm at my wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There's been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched, but these shall not occur again. Here we shall stay till all be well or ill." Quincy held out his hand. "Well, count me in. You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I'll do it." When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel at her chest, and to my surprise produced the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest on waking she should be alarmed. Her eye then lit on Van Helsing and on me too, and gladdened. And then she looked round the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry, and put her poor thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant. She had realized to the full her mother's death, so we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirit, and wept silently and weakly for a long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her all the time. That seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk she fell into a doze. Here a very odd thing occurred. Whilst still asleep, she took the paper from her chest and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing as though the material were still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them as though scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered as if in thought, but he said nothing. All last night she slept fitfully, being always afraid to sleep in something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment untended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intention, but I knew that all night long he patrolled round and round the house. When the day came, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed the difference in her between sleeping and waking. Whilst asleep she looked stronger, although a good deal more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively larger and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked at her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon she asked for Arthur, and we telegraphed for him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When he arrived, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the sun was setting, full and warm. The red light streamed in through the window, and gave more color to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that had passed, the fits of sleep, or the comatose condition that passed for it, had grown more frequent, so that the pauses when conversation was possible were short. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little, and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He, too, pulled himself together, and spoke as cheerily as he could, so that the best was made of everything. It was now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing are sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering this on Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. The poor child cannot rally. God help us all. A letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra, unopened by Miss Westenra. I almost dropped my water bottle there. That would have been troublesome. Library has decided to sit on the office chair this evening instead of joining us off to my left as usual. I think it's because I picked him up while I was standing. 17th September. My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I've heard from you, or indeed since I've wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults, and you have read all my budget of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though he had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. He took us to his house, where there were rooms for us all nice and comfortable, and we dined together. After dinner, Mr. Hawkins said, "My dears, I want to drink to your health and prosperity, and may every blessing attend you both. I know you both from children, and have, with love and pride, seen you grow up. Now I want you to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child. All are gone, and in my will I have left you everything." I cried, Lucy dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands. Our evening was a very, very happy one. So here we are, installed in this beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and the drawing-room I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, with their great black stems standing out against the old yellow slope, or the old yellow stone of the cathedral, and I can hear the rooks overhead cawing and chattering and gossiping all day, after the manner of rooks and humans. I'm busy, I need not tell you, arranging things and housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Hawkins are busy all day, for now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him all about the clients. How is your dear mother getting on? I wish I could run up to town for a day or two to see you, dear, but I dare not go yet, with too much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He's beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, mind, but he was terribly weakened by that long illness. Even now he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way, and awakes all trembling, till I can coax him back to this usual placidity. However, thank God, these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I have told you my news. Let me ask you yours. When are you to be married, and where? And who is to perform the ceremony? What are you to wear? Is it to be a public or a private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything, for there's nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asks me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough from the junior partner of the important firm from Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me, and he loves me, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of this verb, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all blessings on you. Yours, Mina Harker. Report from Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRC, SLK, QCP, QCPI, etc., to John Saward, MD, 20th September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose a report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to Patience Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but, as it was fortunately happening, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house, whose grounds abut on ours. The house to which, you will remember, the patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the patient began to rate him from within, and called him all the foul names he could lay his tongue to. The man, who seemed a decent fellow enough, contented himself by telling him to shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar, whereon our man accused him of robbing him and wanting to murder him, and said that he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. I opened the window and signed for the man not to notice, so he contented himself, after looking the place over and making up his mind as to what kind of place it was. He said, "Lord bless you, sir, I wouldn't mind what you said to me in a bloomin' madhouse. Pitying the governor for having to live in a house with a wild beast like that." Then he asked his way civilly through, and I told him where the gate of the empty house was. He went away, followed by threats and curses and revilings from our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for his anger, since he's usually such a well-behaved man. Except his violent fits, nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blindly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious of the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within half an hour I heard him again. This time he had broken out through the window of his room and was running down the avenue. Called the attendants to follow me, and ran after him, for I feared he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads, and were flushed in the face, as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed at them, and began pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at the moment, I believe he would have killed the man there and then. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of a heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, seizing him also, and struggled with the 3 of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were kittens. You know I'm no lightweight, and the others are burly men. At first he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him, the attendants were putting a strait waistcoat on him. He began to shout, "I'll frustrate them! They shan't rob me! They shan't murder me by inches! I'll fight for our Lord Master!" And all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with very considerable difficulty they got him back to the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a finger broken. However, I set it all right, and he's going on well. The 2 carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law upon us. Their threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology for the defeat of the two of them by a feeble madman. They said that if it had not been for the way their strength had been spent in carrying and raising the heavy boxes to the cart, they would have made short work of him. They gave as another reason for their defeat the extraordinary state of drought to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labours of any public place of entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and after a stiff glass of grog, or rather more of the same, with each a sovereign in hand, they made light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day, for the pleasure of meeting a blooming good bloke as your correspondent. I took their names and addresses in case they might be needed. They're as follows: Jack Smollett of Dudding Rents, King George's Road, Great Falworth, and Thomas Snelling, Peter Farley's Row, Guide Court, Burnthal Green. They are both in the employment of Harrison Sons Moving and Shipping Company, Orange Master's Yard in Soho. I shall report to you any matter of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there is anything of importance. Believe me, dear sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hennessy. Letter. Ooh, sorry, that was very loud. A letter from Mina Harker. A letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra, unopened by her. 18th September. My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly. Some may not think it so sad for us, but we had both come to so love him that it really seems as though we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so that the dear old man's death is a real blow to me. Jonathan is greatly distressed. It is not only that he feels sorrow, deep sorrow even, for the dear good man who has befriended him all his life, and now at the end has treated him like his own son, and left him a fortune to which people of our modest bringing up is well beyond the dream of avarice, but Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts upon him makes him nervous. He begins to doubt himself. I try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock that he experienced tells upon him the most. Oh, it's too hard that such sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his, a nature which enabled him, by our dear good friend's aid, to rise from clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of its strength is gone. Forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness, but Lucy, dear, I must tell someone. The strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan tries me, and I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do the day after tomorrow, for poor Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in the grave with his father. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I will try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving Mina Harker. Dr. Seward's Diary, 20th September. Only resolution and habit can let me make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care that if I heard this moment the flapping of wings of the angel of death. And there has been flapping those grim wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother, Arthur's father, and now, let me go on with my work. I duly relieved Van Helsing in his watch over Lucy. We wanted Arthur to go to rest also, but he refused at first. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, that we must not all break down for want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him.
Come, my child, come with me. You are sick and weak and have had much sorrow and much mental pain, as well as attacks on your strength that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of fears and alarms. Come to the drawing room, where is a big fire. There are two sofas. You shall lie on one, lie on the other. Our sympathy shall be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak, and even if we sleep. Arthur went off with him, casting back a longing look on Lucy's face, which lay in her pillow almost whiter than the lawn. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see that all was as it should be. I could see that the professor carried out in this room, as in the other, the purpose of using the garlic. The whole of the window sashes reeked with it, and round Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief which Van Helsing made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same odorous flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat stertorously, and her face was at its worst, for the open mouth showed the pale gums. Her teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine teeth looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment there was a sort of dull flapping or buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly, and peeped out by the corner of the blind. There was a full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat, which wheeled around, doubtless attracted by the light, although so dim, and every now and again struck the window with its wings. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had moved slightly, and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could, and sat watching her. Presently she woke, and I gave her food as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took but a little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle for life and strength that had hitherto marked her illness. It struck on me so curious that the moment she became conscious she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was certainly odd that whenever she got into that lethargic state, with a stertorous breathing, she took the flowers from her, but when she waked she clutched them close. There was no possibility of making any mistake about this, for in the long hours that followed she had had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both actions many times. At 6 o'clock Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur had then fallen into a doze, and he mercifully let him sleep on. When he saw Lucy's face, I could fear the singing draw of teeth, and he said to me in a sharp whisper, drop the line, I want light." Then he bent down, and with his face almost touching Lucy's, examining carefully, he removed the flowers and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he startled back. I could hear his ejaculation, "My God!" as it was smothered in his throat. I bent over and looked too, and as I noticed, some strange chill went over me. The wounds on the throat had completely disappeared. For fully 5 minutes Van Helsing stood looking at her, with his face at its sternest. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. It will be much difference, mark me, whether she dies conscious or in her sleep. Wake that poor boy. Let him come and see the last. He trusts us. We've promised him." I went to the dining room and waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming in through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late and expressed his fear. I assured him that Lucy was still asleep, but told him as gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was near. He covered his face with his hands, and slid down on his knees by the sofa, where he remained, perhaps for an entire minute, with his head buried, praying, whilst his shoulders shook with grief. I took him by the hand and raised him up. "Come, my dear old fellow. Summon all your fortitude. It will be what's best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything look as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lily's hair so that it lay on the pillow in its usual sunny ripples. When we came into the room, she opened her eyes and, seeing him, whispered softly, "Arthur, oh, my love, I'm so glad you've come." He was stooping to kiss her when Van Helsing pulled him back. "No, not yet. Hold her hand. It will comfort her more." So Arthur took her hand and knelt beside her, and she looked her best, with all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Then, gradually, her eyes closed, and she sunk to sleep. For a little bit, her chest heaved softly, and her breath came and went like a tired child's. And then, insensibly, there came the strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew stertorous, her mouth open, and the pale gums drawn back made the teeth look longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleepwalking, vague, unconscious way, she opened her eyes, which were all now dull and hard at once, and said, in a soft, voluptuous voice as I had never heard from her lips, "Arthur, oh, my love, I'm so glad you've come. Kiss me." Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant Van Helsing, who, like me, had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him, and catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back with a fury of strength which I never thought he actually possessed, and hurled him almost all the way across the room. "Not for your life, not for your living soul in hers!" And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur was so taken aback that he did not for a moment know what to do or say, and before any impulse of violence could seize him, he realized the place and the occasion, and stood silent, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed on Lucy, as did Van Helsing, and we saw a spasm of rage flit like a shadow over her face. The sharp teeth clamped together, then her eyes closed, and she breathed heavily. Very shortly after she opened her eyes, in all their softness, putting out their power, pale. Or rather, putting out her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one, rounding it to her, and she kissed it. "True friend," she said in a faint voice, but with unsustainable pathos. "My true friend in his. Guard him and give me peace." "I swear it," he said solemnly, kneeling beside her and holding up his hand, as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him, "Come, my child, let me take her hand in yours and kiss her on the forehead. Kiss her on the forehead, and only once." Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. Then Lucy's breathing became stertorous again, and all at once it ceased. "It's all over. She's dead." I took Arthur by the arm and led him away to the drawing room, where he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back to the room and found Van Helsing looking at poor Lucy. His face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines, even lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood, no longer needing for the working of the heart, had gone to make the harshness of death as little rude as might be. Oh, honestly, folks, I am getting increasingly sleepy despite my efforts. I think I'm going to just get through this chapter and call it an evening. My sincerest apologies for the short episode. I just have not been sleeping well. The cats have been keeping me up quite severely. Anyway, let's finish up this chapter. We thought her dying while she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing and said, "Oh, poor girl, there's peace for her at last. It's the end." He turned to me and said with grave solemnity, "Not so, alas, not so. It's only the beginning." When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered, "We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see." Okay. Unfortunately, I need to call it an evening there. Like I said, my sleep has been very poor as of late, and I don't want to do this book the disservice of struggling to remain awake despite the action-packed story we're going on. I mean, for goodness sake, Lucy Westenra just died and is probably very likely going to become one of Dracula's thralls. I mean, let's be honest here. You know, her incisors are growing longer, and she's growing more and more pale and weak, and she just expired, looking as though, for all intents and purposes, that she's asleep after having been, mesmerized into not wearing the garlic flowers, which were stopping things. That's likely what's happening, and that's very tense. That's very important, and uh, I don't want to do this I don't want to do this the insult of doing it half asleep. I'm very sorry. As I've said, my sleep has not been well lately. Hopefully, we'll be a little better next week. Oh, I know this is dreadfully short for a paper cuts, but occasionally I'm allowed a short episode. And unfortunately, this is one of those times. We'll pick up next week with chapter 13, where we will be reading out of Dr. Swart's diary. How many chapters do we have here? We have 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and then there's an afternote. So we are less than halfway through this book, I would say. Well, actually, we're just halfway through this book, because I said 27, right? Well, because half of 25 is 12 and a half, plus one more for 27 chapters would be 13. So we are halfway through the book now. We'll dig into the second half of the book with Dr. Seward's diary next week. Hopefully after I've gotten a little better sleep. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.